That's figuring out like, how do I frame this argument in a way where they're gonna feel it, right? Now impacts can mean a lot of different things. It can be like, makes the world a worse place or increases atomization and kind of the splintering of social relations. It could go in a different direction and say like this will lead to nuclear war and best case scenario, it'll kill 5 million people, right? But the point is that the stronger of an impact you have, the clear impact you have, the more compelling your argument is and the more it's weighted, right? So even like a small argument, like a simple claim or a warrant that isn't very strong, if that warrant isn't attacked and you have a very big impact as a result of it, sometimes smaller arguments can win you the debate, right? Depending on how it's impacted, yeah.
Is the impact related to the warrant or the claim?
So they're kind of in order, right? Which I'll get you some examples in a second. But like first you make a claim, I think that there's a lot of election fraud in the United States. Then you have the evidence. It seems like a lot of registered voters are, have bad data on them in the database or something like that. And then the impact is we can't actually know that our elections are legitimate until we solve every single one of these data problems, right? Democracy is fake. So that's the impact. The impact is democracy is fake. Now we can say you can go further and impact that in terms of like, if our democracy is fake.
So I'm thinking more in terms of it's the impact of the claim. If this claim is true, then this is the impact of this claim.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Although usually you want to think about it holistically, right? Because
but you're going to do it in this order.
Right. But your evidence should also consider the impact, right? Because you don't want to have a weak link between these, right? And so they can say like, all right, well, yes, it would be really bad if this impact happened. However, their evidence doesn't actually support the scenario, right? The scenario that their evidence supports is not about whether or not we have democracy in the United States. It's how confident are we with certain specific turnouts, right? Which is a smaller concern. That's something we can explore and we can remedy. But I would not concede the impact that democracy is going to fall apart just because we have some voting complications with a few registered voters, right? So that's, we want to have a strong link connecting them, right? And you can always come back and be like, well, actually, that's one piece of evidence. But in fact, there's 4 pieces of evidence that I'll provide. And even if I win one of these pieces of evidence, our impact is true. And it's true because blah, 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 right? Because people's belief that democracy is absolute and that we can have 100% confidence in our system is the only way that we can actually have a legitimate republic on the world stage, that we can project democracy, that we can be the shining city on the hill, right? Things like that, right? So you can always modify your arguments. Yeah.
The debate has like a motion, right? Or a proposition, and are then the debaters making a claim for or against, or how does it relate to the proposition?
Right, so you have a resolution, and you can have different formats of the resolution. We'll get to some examples as well, but and I'll provide more context actually to when we get to those, but just the basic overview is you get affirmative and negative. So on the affirmative, you want to prove the resolution true, right? Like there are fatal flaws in our democratic system. So as the affirmative, I want to argue about fake voters and stuff like that. As the negative, I want to argue that either directly that the affirmative case isn't true, or the affirmative case is making poor assumptions about the way things work, right? Like that's not actually, the way they define democracy is incorrect. And because it's incorrect, they cannot prove the resolution true, right?
Okay,
so that's another way.
The claim is addressing the resolution.
Say it again?
So the claim is addressing the resolution.
That's right. Yeah. And generally, so when someone is on the negative, they're negating the affirmative team, right? But they can also attack not the resolution, but that the affirmative team isn't proving the resolution true. That is the affirmative burden, right?